Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And it's a live midweek show. We're going to go live. Might do this on the regular, so keep an eye out for it. Robert, along with Sports Radio 610's Shaun Bijani. He's the guy, whichever other direction that is. I'm pointing, I don't know which direction I'm pointing to, but between the two of us, 45 years in journalism and over 35 years covering Houston sports. And Shaun, we got to start off with the Astros and the loss of Justin Verlander. He signs a 2-year, $86 million deal with the Mets. Was that too rich for your blood?
Too rich for the Houston Astros blood, 100%. You know, it's, to me, honestly, it was really never about the money. As long as you had innings incentives and a team-friendly option built in with that incentive, basically the same deal that he just got off of with the Houston Astros. The money was just plus like 18 million AAV. The money, who cares? It's not our money. And as long as your owner, Jim Crane in this case, is, telling you that, hey, we have no problem going into the luxury tax and paying that as long as it's the right decision. Obviously, it was not the right feeling, the right decision to bring Justin Verlander back. I got to be honest with you. Look at the last few months, okay? And I'll say few months generally, Robert, because that's when there's really started to be a lot of rumblings like, okay, what's James Click's future here? Man, Jim Crane really seems like he's involved. Man, Jeff Bagwell's risen in the ranks. Man, Reggie Jackson, they're really listening to him. All of these things that we've learned over the course of the last few months and really the last 4 weeks particularly, I'm glad Jim Crane did not bring Justin Verlander back, because I think it teaches us maybe to step back ourselves, maybe reinvigorates us and having more confidence in Jim Crane to not be that hasty, meddlesome owner that's just going to throw money at guys and no matter what the age is. No, like this tells me like, yes, he's not afraid to spend money. And yes, he's still going to be very calculated, quite to the contrary of the James Click comments when he was in the winter meetings in Las Vegas, who said, yeah, I'm more deliberate. And Jim tends to be the more aggressive style. I'm glad he didn't make this move for that reason. And really, if it was the innings incentives, the options, whatever the details really that do matter in the contract negotiations, if that didn't fit, then fine. Because I feel really good about the Astros rotation going forward. And the fact, too, that if in fact they do incur an injury or two, that Jim Crane is not afraid to pull the trigger on a midseason deal to bolster a rotation if need be.
Well, if you're out there watching or listening to us on YouTube, let's hear from you. Give us a question or comment. We want to know what you think about the Verlander deal. Even if you're not live, you're watching it later, give us a comment. Don't forget that this Sunday, we're going to have our live Texans post-game show, Texans and Cowboys. And yesterday I posted a live Rockets conversation with my weekly guest, Frank from Rockets Chop Shop. So lots of good stuff. Look for all the live shows under the live tab on our YouTube page, or check your favorite podcast app. And Shaun, our friend Adam Spillane at Sports Radio 610, I know you've heard of this place, said he would have given Verlander the money because he said he's worth it. He's an ace. Well, my response is Framber and Javier are the real aces right now because postseason matters. Verlander gave up 4 or more earned runs in 6 of his last 12 postseason starts. He only went 6 innings in 4 of those 12 starts. But I do agree with one of Adam's points. He said Verlander gave this staff innings, and those innings mattered for this relief corps in the postseason. They had gas in the tank, Shaun, partially because of JV. Javier, Garcia, Urquidy, or McCullers need to go deeper into games now that Verlander is gone. At least one of those 4 guys has to do it.
Knowing Adam, his logic is basically what I'd broken down, and I've actually not always had, but I've come around to, in the fact that it's not my money. It's not our money. So yeah, give him the money. That's kind of Adam's philosophy there. But yeah, no, the point that he does make about Verlander eating the innings and saving the bullpen throughout the regular season And to be quite honest, we even gritting it out on a couple of postseason starts when he probably could have been pulled earlier than he was. And in some cases, maybe should have been, who knows? Revisionist history. It's a BI, I'll say this. It's never just one thing. Okay. Because as good of a point as it is to say that, hey, JV gave you X amount of innings. Okay. And won X amount of ball games. And his ERA was great. Strikeout to walk ratio, all of these things, it's not just one thing. To be able to go 7 innings routinely during the regular season, yes, saves your bullpen, but you're also forgetting about, the guys in the 7th, 8th, or 9th. And in some cases with Verlander, he had about 4 or 5 bad starts this regular season. The bullpen had to be used in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. What about those guys? This pitching staff as a whole was tremendously blessed with not having to incur or go through any sort of injury adversities outside of the month or so that Verlander missed, which was, I think more precautionary than anything. And then being without Lance McCullers for the bulk of the season. I mean, that's it. Maybe a little knick-knack here and there, but it was nothing like, holy smokes, where you were really biting your nails and, sweating it out. That's the other thing, is injuries will happen and you can't plan for them, but you have to prepare for them. And so it's not just enough to say that, look at the guys, Javier and Urquidy and Fromber, all these guys, the rest of the starters, all 6 of them that we had this year. Look what they did. Doesn't mean they're going to do the same thing in 2023. You have to prepare for, worst case scenario. You have to prepare for maybe some regression, maybe a career year type of thing. I don't know. Is that going to be Fromber? Is that going to be Christian Javier? Is that going to be the best we ever see of Hunter Brown? Who knows? I think, those are extremes, obviously, but that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. And I wrote an article this week, losing JV to the Mets. If it would have been to the Yankees, or if it would have been to the Dodgers, if it would have been to the Red Sox, teams like that, then I would have really questioned life itself. But this one doesn't sting at all for me, not even a little bit. It was, tip your cap. Thank you for your service, man. We appreciate it. 2 World Series and some of the most tremendous pitching and team leadership and grit that we've ever seen in Houston baseball. That's kind of what I took away from it. And so I'm feeling really good about where the Astros are at going forward without him.
Baseball, to me, it's about don't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, I've watched too many teams do that. $40 million is a lot of money for one guy. For a guy that's 40 years old who has a recent history of injuries, and I know what he did, and I know he had an incredible year and all of that, but it's just like that money, if something goes wrong, you've got $40 million that you didn't spend that you could spend on something at the trade deadline if somebody gets injured, like you said, Shaun.
Yeah. And, you can go 2 ways here. Depends on how you look at it, right? Robert, $40 million ain't what it used to be. Look at the market for Aaron Judge. The Yankees last year offered him 8 years, $230 million. And after having a career year and breaking one of the more hallowed New York Yankee records, never mind an American League record. Nobody gave a rip about that. It was a Yankee home run record, 61 asterisk. And he broke that thing. Career year, and he got $130 million raise in an offer from the Yankees. And oh, by the way, the Padres probably helped the Yankees out a little bit, and old knucklehead spilling the beans about Judge going to the Giants rather, and then the Padres swoop in, make this offer, and then Hal says, "Oh yeah, what do you think about an extra year on the contract and an extra $130 million from what I initially offered you? How's that taste?" So $40 million ain't what it used to be. But then 2, you're absolutely right. If in fact, yes, Verlander or anybody that's, playing for that amount of money gets injured or underperforms, boy, you don't feel good at all about that $40 million. And it's a similar conversation, right, that we had just within the last week with the Jose Abreu signing, giving him an AAV of nearly $20 million during the life of this contract with the Astros. All right, I don't believe all the numbers say that he's going to have this massive decline, but the fear is like, holy smokes, he is up in age, even just a couple of years younger than Yuli. What if he really falls off a cliff like Yuli did just months after winning a batting title? That's a concern, but that's a roll of the dice. And guess what? This team has been rolling in the money like Donald Duck the last 6 years. I mean, or it's not Donald
Yeah,
Duck.
it's not about the fact that people get caught
up.
up in it's rolling in the money. It's not necessarily about rolling in the money because you still have some sort of budget. It's still a thing in baseball. And you like in the NFL, you go, oh, we're rolling in the money. Let's just spend $50 million on this quarterback and $50 million on you can't do that. And you get yourself trapped if guys start getting hurt, if stuff starts to go wrong. And you said the money is not what it used to be. Look, Aaron Judge is making $36 million a year because he hit 62 home runs and because he's 30 years old and he's doing it for the next 9 years. And I still think that contract is stupid because you're going to be paying him in those last 3 or 4 years. And he is not going to be hitting 60 home runs when he's 37, 38, and 39. Sorry.
What did I tell you weeks ago? The Astros they're so damn good. Okay. And they were so, fortunate to get these team-friendly contracts with the likes of Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman in particular. And to be honest with you, Yuli Gurriel and Michael Brantley, those are really sweet contracts for, I think, the level of production that they gave you when they were on the field and healthy, wink, Michael Brantley. But they've gotten a lot of those kind of performances from some guys that, you could make the argument they would have gotten a lot more money elsewhere. They're so damn good, Robert. They're going to make teams do some really stupid things. Look at Trey Turner signing for the Philadelphia Phillies for, what did he get, 11 years, $300 million? Stop it already. Like, are you kidding me? Look what the Phillies are doing. Look at what the Yankees are doing. Look at what the Padres, where did all this money come from the Padres? This clearly means they can afford to throw crazy money at Carlos Correa now if they so choose, or any team that was in an Aaron Judge deal. Look what this does to them, and it bulks up the market. Like it's crazy.
The Astros haven't made anybody do stupid stuff. They're going to do stupid stuff without the Astros. We've seen it for years and years and years.
You're trying to catch them.
This is sports. This is baseball. We've seen it before. Let me ask you, because I think there was a thing that got brought up. Should Verlander's jersey be retired at Minute Maid? Before you answer that question, just give you his final numbers as an Astro: 102 starts, 61-19 with a 2.26 ERA, 0.83 WHIP, 2 Cy Young awards, 1 Cy Young runner-up, 1 300 strikeout season, an ALCS MVP, a no-hitter, and 2 titles. Yada yada yada. Whatever.
Hey, I used to be a numbers guy, like in regards to like player jerseys. What number was Verlander? Refresh my memory.
Oh, I don't remember the jerseys at all. I don't remember the jersey numbers at all.
All right, so there's point number one. Like, okay, who kind of whatever jersey in the rafters? It's not what it used to be. It's kind of a cool deal. The Yankees, they do the numbers, they do the monuments, and their yard out in the outfield. Boston's really iconic with their numbers. On the left field facade, or the right field facade rather. Yeah, it would be cool, but it would have to be kind of like a historic thing within the Astros organization, correct? Like, he would have played like the least amount of games for the least amount of years to have his jersey number retired in the rafters. Granted, the resume speaks for itself. Like, yeah, would you, why not do it? Hell, put a statue, like they got the statue of, I think, Biggio and Bagwell out in front of the ballpark. Like, make a little pitcher's mound and put JV on there. Give him a statue, do the jersey. I don't care. But yes, the guy should be memorialized. Is that the word? Can you be memorialized if you're living? Honored. But one way or another, if you're the Houston Astros, because I think back to 2017, before he was a Houston Astro, the city was distraught and brokenhearted, with Hurricane Harvey just ravaging the area. And it wasn't just that, but the team needed a spark. The team needed another pitcher. And I think it was Dallas Keuchel who really, was the most vocal at that point in time, where you could just hear the just disappointment in his voice, and the mood just emanated from that clubhouse that they needed something. And Jim Crane had a pulse. And yes, in large part, it was made about, like, he's doing this for the city, to kind of reinvigorate, the city of Houston after, such tragic natural events, with the hurricane. It did that. And sure, you could make it about that. But what that ended up meaning for the city, like putting people back in the seats and giving them something to cheer about, and the Astros doing what they were doing. And he was kind of one of the guys that became the face of that run, along with Altuve and Springer and so many other guys. Like, that was a special time. That is Houston history. He was a part of the first World Series championship in this city's history. That has to be remembered, and it has to be more than just, a golden aluminum banner, in left center field. I absolutely think they could do it. Should they do it? Absolutely. If they decided not to do it, but put a statue of him outside of the stadium, I'm fine with that too.
Well, and he can be in the Astros Hall of Fame, which is something that we didn't have a few years ago. So
And he
that's a
will.
good thing. Yeah, he will. And I saw you post something about which Houston players were the saddest, or were people the saddest to see leave Houston. And for me, this was an easy one. It was Nolan followed by Springer, because both were still great players and they were two of my favorites. Akeem, Earl, Andre Johnson, JJ Watt, Moses Malone, they were all past their prime when they left. So you just felt like they weren't the same guy that you saw when they were in their prime. And guys like Beltran, Garrett Cole, Verlander, actually, they never quite felt like ours anyway. Correa hurt a little, but I was braced for it.
Yeah, but you remember how mad people were when Beltran left and signed that big deal with the Mets. Like, people around here wanted him bad. They felt like, he could have been if not the missing piece.
Yeah, but they were more mad not because you were missing this guy that, he's Houston. They were just mad because, he could help us win it. he was great in the playoffs. Wow.
Yeah. And you went to the World Series anyway the next year without him. But how weak hitting that team turned out to be in the series against those White Sox. Which
he would have helped.
You never know. He would have helped. Maybe he would have helped. You never know. But it's funny. You just kind of made me think of something. The way that people talk about this ALCS between the Astros and Yankees this past season, it's like, man, we really gave it to the Yankees, man. We really let them have it. They're trash. The people are saying the same thing about that 2005 World Series, and they've been doing it for 20 some odd years. And I never, or almost 20 years, I never felt that way. Like, every single one of those games felt way closer than the outcome. And I think the largest outcome in that series was like 4 runs. Maybe it was like a 5-1 victory for the White Sox or something like that. But I've always thought about that, and I kind of applied that same emotion and thought process to this ALCS between the Astros and Yankees. It was like, those were hard games to win. It doesn't matter, that you blew right through them. They were tough. You were on the edge of your seat every single night, and you were just hoping, like, man, please make this pitch, Ryan Presley. Please make this pitch, Abreu. Please get to the 7th inning, Javier. Whoever it was, you didn't want Judge to come up, or you didn't want, Stanton to come up, or whoever, who was a really good leadoff hitter not the leadoff hitter, but maybe the 2-hitter for them that was just like crushing it all series. You just didn't want those guys to come up, and you were one pitch away or one bat away from that happening. So
that's baseball. That's baseball.
Yeah, it's baseball.
I mean, who cares? It's baseball, and the people were excited about the Yankees because the Yankees fans, and they talk trash, and all of the history between the Yankees and the Astros, if that's why they cared. But I want to ask you also, the Astros pursued Wilson Contreras, but he signed with the Cardinals today. They pursued him despite Dusty nixing the midseason deal. He was asked about that and said, quote, "It's not that I didn't want him at the time. I didn't think it was the proper fit with 2 months to go in the season. You have to learn the pitching staff, how we go about doing things. I didn't feel like there was enough time to do that." Shaun, maybe we underestimate how long it takes to learn a pitching staff. I don't know.
Well, I mean, those are all good points. I mean, 100%. They were all excellent points by Dusty Baker. What I was more surprised at in him giving those explanations during the winter meetings the other day was the fact that when that deal did not go down, when the Astros were making their run in the World Series, and maybe it was like right after the World Series where that story had come out by Jeff Passan or one of the baseball writers, whoever it was that had it initially, the report was that, yes, all of that too, But Dusty Baker did not want Contreras with the Astros because it was a contract year and he was going to want to play every day. And he didn't maybe feel like a guy in that position was going to be what this team needed from a distraction standpoint, right? And somebody that they're tailoring things to for one guy. And on top of that,
Vasquez was under contract for 2 more months too, and he was a starter. So I just feel like there must have been a difference in what they thought was the personalities of the two guys, and
yes, isn't that a part of the personality? Like contract year or not, like you're an individual, you're going to a new team. You've got to understand the situation. Like you're going from a middling team to a World Series contender. And if you don't think that individual has the character, the mentality, the attitude to accept a different role, then sorry, thanks, but no thanks. Quite similarly to what everybody's kind of making about, this is 2022. I guess we better get used to it by now. Well, people are making out about the Instagram post for Martin Maldonado the other day. Okay, is he not happy with his assumed role if in fact the Astros do land a Sean Murphy, or if they would have gotten a Contreras or somebody like that, where he's going to be relegated to maybe playing once or twice a week, in a backup role?
Guess what? It turns out that major league players don't like to be benched, and it doesn't matter who it is. And if Dusty had gotten Johnny Bench in a trade 2 months to go into the season, he would go, you know what? Johnny Bench, I think he can figure out the pitching staff in a couple of months. I think we'll be okay.
It's just Johnny Bench. Wilson Contreras isn't exactly Johnny Bench or Yogi Berra or even Martin Maldonado behind home plate. He's a plus hitting catcher. That's it. And Dusty Baker said it numerous times this season that we pay Martin Maldonado to catch and handle a pitching staff. Our lineup is so good, we don't really need him to hit, which brings me to my point and my question to you. Why isn't it good enough all of a sudden now? Now that you've improved first base, and even if center field stays status quo, you're going to, I don't know how yet, but you're going to improve left field. Okay, and the DH role and how Jordan fits into all that, that's going to be improved on paper. So why now is it this big rush where the Houston Astros are being, attached to all of these different catchers? Would I love them? Absolutely. Would I like to not see Martin Maldonado hit 156 for the bulk of a regular season? Yes. Would I like him to be more productive at the plate in a postseason? Absolutely. But they won a World Series without him doing all of those things. And I don't want there to be a trickle-down effect to where you possibly lose Michael Brantley, you lose Yuli Gurriel, maybe you lose Martin Maldonado because he isn't just going to be happy in his new role. Maybe you lose a lot of the glue guys, a lot of the guys that really made up a good portion of character and grit of this locker room that has really helped the wheels continue to go round over the last 6 years and give you 2 World Series.
Father Time moves on. You got to find guys that have grit, that play behind those guys, and you got to hope somebody like a Jeremy Pena takes over more of a leadership role this year. Obviously, he did it in the clutch, but he's going to be required to be more of a leader this year than he was last year. And keep in mind, last year he was the same age. Let me remind everybody, he was the same age as Carlos Correa was 2 years ago when he was yelling at Fromber and pumping him up on the mound in the playoffs. And everybody was talking about what a great leader Carlos Correa was. So keep that in mind. Contreras, by the way, just so everybody, if you haven't heard, 5 years, $87 million, 17 per year. Too much for a 30-year-old catcher, in my opinion. No thanks. No thanks.
Yeah, and what is quite possibly a career year for, as you said, a 30-year-old catcher. Like, you talk about expecting a decline. I mean, it seems very natural. Now, what's interesting about that is him going to the St. Louis Cardinals, which that staff, that team, that organization is very used to, and rightfully so, having absolute greatness behind the plate. And one of the most incredible defensive catchers that you'll have ever seen. being replaced by a guy who prior to this last year was not just not known for being a good defensive catcher, but for being one of the worst in baseball. Could hit, but how much of a emphasis is going to be put on Contreras to really improving what he does behind the plate defensively and calling game, handling his staff? I think that's going to be interesting to kind of follow his production next year in St. Louis. I mean, it's impossible to expect a guy like that, who's a really good ball player and proven as such since he's been in the league, but to replace a future Hall of Famer, that's that you never ask that of anybody. But there is a demand behind the dish within that organization of having a plus defensive catcher. It's been that way for a long time, probably 20 some odd years if you look back. Who was the catcher before?
Molina?
Yeah,
like
Molina.
Dude, I do not have that good of a memory. I'm sorry.
Was it Matheny?
Matheny sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was there for a long time. And before him, I think they had a really good one, and the name escapes me. It's kind of been that way. And just look at the Astros. They expect a certain kind of thing, and you get used to a certain kind of thing at a particular position, or just the expectation of one of your leaders or higher paid players.
Yeah. And I just could care less about the Cardinals because it's poor people problems. We're rich people. I don't know if you realize that, Sean, but we're rich people.
I am not ever going to take that for granted or take advantage of that in any way, shape, or form, because I remember all too well sitting at home trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do, because I can't watch my Astros, whether or not they're losing 100+ ball games a year, to save my life. Like I'm relishing every pitch, literally, with this organization now, and I'll never take it for granted again.
Well, we do have poor people here in Houston, and they're called the Texans, and you've been holed up over at NRG Stadium. I assume you heard the reaction when Davis Mills was named starting quarterback again. Not a tremendous surprise, but what did you think about that?
Well, the surprise was how well Lovie Smith handled the announcement. I just couldn't figure out why the hell he didn't do it last week. And I really wanted to ask a question today, but I could not for the second straight day, or twice in 3 days, whatever it's been, because I wanted to do the same thing on Monday when he was at the podium. But I can't find out a way to ask these questions without me sounding like a jerk. Sometimes I think I just have that sound in my voice, or maybe the expression on my face, where I'm going to come across as a real jerk. I wanted to know from Lovie. And I think I know the answer myself, but it's one of those things, like, it has to be asked. What happened to the competitive advantage? Why are you naming Davis Mills the starter in the middle of a week now, when 2 weeks ago you refused to name Kyle Allen the starter for your explanation it was going to be a competitive advantage for the Miami Dolphins? Why isn't it a competitive advantage for the Dallas Cowboys? Is it because they just put 50 points on the board and it's not really going to make a hill of beans whether or not you name, Tom, Dick, or Harry the starter versus Davis Mills on Wednesday? Like, I really think the answer is that, hey, it was a botched job. This is what coaches say when teams are relevant, and we're not going to acknowledge the fact that we're irrelevant because we're trying to keep a locker room. And I made the change initially because the locker room basically told me to make a change by the way that they're playing, the way that they're acting. That's why the word spark is used ever, because the team needs it. It feels it. It's telling you that the incumbent is not good, that we stink, and we need to make a change, any change. Was it time for another one? Yeah, because Kyle Allen, unfortunately, I like him as a person, but he was just that embarrassingly bad. Quarterback sneak fumble. He fumbled again, threw 2 interceptions, one of them to Tegan Quatoriano, which, dumb luck. Same way you can excuse the first 2 picks of the season by Davis Mills, the tip balls in the end zone. I get that stuff. Sometimes those things can be explained away, but it's also a route concept that was freaking stupid. And again, Pep Hamilton should not go unnoticed, untalked about. disregarded. This falls on him, and I would not be surprised to see if this is the very last time in his career, and whatever it may turn out to be for him in any league, the last time that he's calling plays for any team, at least in the NFL.
You probably say whatever you want to him at this point because he might be dead man walking. You might only have 3 or 4 weeks to say anything to him. Period, John.
Yeah, I guess I could. You're right, but it's also, the public relations staff, as I am planning, will be there a lot longer than Lovie Smith. And, whoever the new coach is, I'm still going to have to try to get a word in edgewise with the current PR staff in years to come, I'm assuming. So I don't know. And, I don't, if he's fired tomorrow, it didn't matter. It's just like, I do always want to come across as respectful as possible. And for a guy that is self-proclaimed dumb as rocks, I don't want to come across as like, hey, I know more than you. And that's exactly how I think Lovie Smith tends to look at members of the media, this season, that you either think you know more than I do and you don't and you're stupid, or, I'm just going to be the Mr. Tough Chicago guy that I have been able to kind of rely upon and hang my hat upon over the last 15 years.
I'm just going to quit on coaches ever doing anything that would require any sort of common sense in any of their press conference, or just, just tell us like, hey, you see what these 2 quarterbacks are that I got. What do you want me to do? I'm doing the best I can up here. I
do wish, Robert, there was a little bit of an element, because I think the look in itself from Lovie could pull it off. I wish there was a little bit of Jim Mora in him, especially in this particular type of season, in the situation that he at least somewhat knowingly undertook, Hey, exactly what you said. We're terrible. We stink. Playoffs. What? We're just trying to win a game. And in this case, for Lovie, it would be winning a game. We're just trying to get, 100 yards in the first half. I mean, they put up -5 yards in a game in the first half at one point this season and followed it up with 35. I mean, every week in the first half, it is kind of like, ugh. And you know what? Let's not pretend like Gary Kubiak's offense was this explosive machine, because one of the biggest criticisms during Gary Kubiak's time here, when he had Matt Schaub and Andre Johnson, all these guys, you started slow in the first half. It wasn't anything exciting. You never threw deep to Dre. He was never on the field in red zone situations. And if he was, you wouldn't throw it to him in the end zone. How the hell that guy ever scored as many touchdowns as he did is beyond me. And it's really because of all the yak that he, piled up over the years. I mean, go look at his numbers. I mean, he had plenty of 50-plus yard catches for touchdowns. I mean, I guess that's how you had to do is throw it in space. But, I mean, let's just not pretend or kid ourselves that we're not used to seeing this. And I cannot wait for a young, bright offensive mind to come in as an offensive coordinator at the very least, maybe even a head coach, with the number 1 overall draft pick, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and get this thing going.
One of the many things that stinks about the Texans being awful this year is happening this Sunday. You only get the Texans-Cowboys rivalry game once every 4 years. I'm guessing NRG might be 80% Cowboys fans on Sunday, if not more. And
Sean, it's up in Dallas. It's in Dallas. It's not.
That's right. It's in Dallas. But yeah, if it was down here, it would be about 80%. But you only get this rivalry, once every 4 years. And I had Seth Payne on the show a few years ago and I asked him about that Texans win over the Cowboys in the Texans' very first game 20 years ago now.
19-10.
19-10. Yep. 19-10.
Why the hell do I remember that?
I'm going to ask you about it in a second, but let's do a quick Houston Sports Talk flashback and see what Seth Payne had to say when I was talking to him about that. Is your team's win against the Cowboys in Game 1 still the franchise's most memorable win?
I don't think so. I mean, those the first playoff victory, especially. I mean, I wasn't there for it. I was watching in a small bar outside of Olney in New York when JJ had that huge play in that game, and that might be my most exciting memory in Texans history. So I think it was the biggest one for the first 5 or 6 or 7 years until they started to have that success again. But it's definitely, I think from emotionally, and I know just from talking to a lot of the Texans fans, especially the ones that have had season tickets since the very beginning, I know how big and how momentous it was for people that had really missed football for all those years.
Yeah, Shaun, I say beating the Bengals in a playoff game, it's hard for me to have real emotions and feelings about that. But beating the Cowboys on the first game when you're, just an expansion franchise, to me, that's still the biggest win. I mean, until they can, do something really extra, and they'd have to do it in the playoffs, I would think, but do something really extraordinary in the playoffs, perhaps an AFC championship game for the first time since 1979, 80 or something like that. But that win against the Cowboys is, for me, the most memorable.
It's the most memorable, I think, probably for most people. And I say that because even in the years in which the Texans, were winning the AFC South and going to the playoffs, I mean, they weren't among the very best teams in the NFL, but maybe twice you could say they were amongst the very best teams in the NFL. And even then, they were probably, the 8th best team in the playoffs, right? And so for that reason, like, yes, I agree with you. That game of its inception, the win against the Cowboys, is probably the most memorable because really, when does this organization stop feeling so young relative to the rest of the league, right? I mean, they're not 25 years old yet. And when you talk about some of the other like armpits of the league, it was Cleveland for so many years. It was Miami for so many years as well. Kansas City before they had Patrick Mahomes, like you had, Joe Montana sprinkled in a little bit, and they kicked the Oilers' butts back in the early 90s. But, the teams, the Raiders, I mean, God bless, they stunk for so long. The Seahawks, you could go on down the line, but these are all teams that had a rich history in their original cities, at the very least, at least when you talk about the Raiders and such. But I can't think of a particular playoff game aside from maybe the Bengals, I guess. And I guarantee you, if they would have won this game, we'd be talking about it more, and it'd probably go down as the most memorable. But if TJ Yates beats the Ravens that year in the playoffs, that probably goes down at that point in time as the most memorable win.
Yeah, there could be a lot of ifs with the Texans and playoff games. So, but I just, to me, like beating the Bengals in the playoffs was not a momentous thing back then because the Bengals would go out in the first round or they wouldn't make the playoffs. So,
but it was how they did it, and Seth made a good point, the iconic JJ play, all right, it's one play within a singular game, but it was the playoffs. And, as we know, anything can happen in the playoffs. It was just, unfortunately, the Texans were not built or had the fortitude physically and mentally, really, to ever do those things, make that statement true enough here in the city of Houston.
What do you remember about that first Cowboys game? Were you there? Were you watching on TV?
I was not there. My first Texan game was actually a preseason game, and I want to say it was against the Dolphins that year. It was the first home game. So I went to the first home game at NRG, not the first regular season game. But I did watch it, and I remember just we had the TV blaring in my grandfather's living room. I was watching it with my grandmother, my grandfather. I just remember looking at how cool the field looked. Like the game stayed smoky all night long because of the fireworks from the pregame or whatever they had blasted off there. And I just remember that. I remember Billy Miller, reaching into the end zone and scoring that touchdown. You'd still see the fog, the smoke in the air. Like that was just really, really cool. And, watching on TV, I was like, man, how could a stadium ever be louder than that? There's 72,000 people. They're just screaming their lungs out. And then I went to a Texans and Jacksonville Jaguars game in which I want to say it was David Carr over the right corner of the end zone, south end zone, jumped over the right pylon, scored a touchdown in overtime or at the end of regulation to beat the Jaguars. I was sitting club level that game. That was the loudest, still to this day, I've ever heard any sports arena in my life. That place exploded. And that was a really cool memory for me, even though it seems like it is a little bit shaky because I think it was David Carr. I know it was the Jags, and that was an awesome moment. Other one would have been if the Texans would have beaten the Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football, but I think they gave up a kick return touchdown that blew that in overtime.
We could go with so many ifs of, what if they beat the Chiefs in the playoffs when they're up 20 points? I mean, there's so many ifs with the Texans. Oh, my goodness.
Of course. There's some teams, some organizations don't have those ifs, or at least the ifs are a lot bigger. The Texans have had their opportunities. They've had their moments to really ingratiate themselves to the city of Houston long before the Astros obviously did with this recent run. And they'll do that. They will do that one day. Is it going to be with Nick Caserio as general manager? I think that is the $1 million question. Is he going to be fired at the end of the year? Absolutely no. I think any conversation as such is ridiculous at this point in time. It's hard for people to see the forest through the trees. But this is his project. What are you going to do? Pay him, his millions of dollars for 4 years to not be the general manager of this team? Like you're paying David Culley $21 million over the next 3 to not coach football anymore? Like you're paying Bill O'Brien his money to not coach anymore? Like you're paying so many guys. It's not going to happen. This is his plan. Hadn't looked exactly like Cal was sold that it was going to look, but he's definitely going to give Caserio his time, especially coming off of this past year's draft and with the draft capital that they have in 23, and see what he can do with it.
Yeah, go check our last live post-game show with the Texans and the Browns because we get into in-depth a little bit about Nick Caserio and, if he should be around next year and all that. I'm going to put up, I just did put up a clip. So it should be up there on YouTube about that whole conversation of Caserio, because somebody did ask us about that in the last Texans post game. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're going to do that Texans Cowboys post game. Hopefully this thing can stay close. Last I checked, Sean, the Texans had a 17-point disadvantage in the in the betting, which is the worst
line. It's the biggest line in the NFL this season, and the second biggest against the Texans, which previously was 13. And last year, I think they had a line bigger than 17 about 3 different occasions, and both of them covered. It was the Bills and Cardinals, I believe, that blew the brakes off of them last year.
Yep. I was going to point out, yes, it is the biggest line in the NFL this year, the Texans and the Cowboys for this game. And like I said, it sucks that it means nothing. And there isn't like a bunch of Texans fans that are wanting to go up to Dallas to be at the game like they do every single time that the Texans play the Cowboys in Dallas and have done over the years. That part is really something that's missing from the rivalry at this point. And, hopefully the Texans will be worth a darn in 4 years when they play each other again. But Sean, thanks for doing this. We'll talk to you again on Sunday.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, you can support the show by subscribing on YouTube and commenting on the videos. Listen to Houston Sports Talk on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and Google. Don't forget to tell a friend and share our show on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.